Welcome to a special episode of Brazil Crypto Report. Today we're recording from the B Hotel rooftop in Brasilia, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Gurvais Grigg, who is the Chief Technology Officer responsible for public sector at Chainalysis. Gurvais, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Amazing. So to get started, why don't you just tell us a bit about your role at Chainalysis and what you guys are doing in Brasilia here today?
Well, happy to be here. As you said, I'm the Chief Technology Officer, and I'm responsible for our public sector efforts, and that's a global remit. So my role is I travel around the world meeting with our public sector partners, like here in Brazil and in Europe and other parts of Central and South America, as well as in Asia. I work with our law enforcement and public sector partners to help them develop and advance their cryptocurrency and digital asset strategies.
Amazing, amazing. And so before you came to Chainalysis, you spent more than 2 decades at the FBI in Washington, D.C. And would love for you to tell us a bit about that experience and then how that ultimately led you into Chainalysis and the world of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, that was a wonderful experience. I mean, spent over 2 decades with the FBI, sort of working both criminal and national security investigations, following bad guy money around the world. I first began my career working violent crime, kidnappings, interstate theft, that kind of thing, and then moved into white collar crimes, advanced frauds, money laundering, and the like. Then 9/11 happened, and we began to follow the money, but this time following terrorist money. And helped was one of those that helped stand up the terrorist financing operations section to follow terrorist money and really develop the terrorist financing efforts of the FBI. And that's where we began to hone those capabilities. And I loved that ability to follow the money. And then, of course, as that began to develop and move, and it came time to retire, I knew I wanted to stay in that follow the money capability. And when you look at 21st century finance, that's blockchain and that's crypto. So the opportunity to be the chief technology officer for the leading blockchain analytic firm, Chainalysis, it was just the perfect opportunity to combine those skill sets. And that's what led me to Chainalysis.
Yeah, it's a great skill stacking opportunity, right? It really combines everything you're interested in. And at what point, I mean, when you were with the FBI, at what point did crypto really become, really come onto the FBI's radar as something that, like, hey, we should probably be paying attention to this. Like, there's some weird stuff going on here. Like, I would assume you guys are probably pretty early on, like earlier than people would have expected.
Yeah. So you really go all the way back to Mount Gox and in those early days of Silk Road when those cyber criminals began to come onto the national scene and really before mainstream began to pay attention to them. The FBI began to notice this trend and realize this was going to change the underlying way criminals moved money illicitly. And we began to pay attention to that. And it really has fundamentally altered how illicit money can move on the dark web.
Got it, got it. And so you've really spent your career, at the intersection of just like all things, crime and money laundering and following the money and whatnot. And I would love to get your take on like how this has really how the use of crypto for illicit purposes has maybe evolved into 2024, right? I think back in probably 10 years ago with the Mount Gox episode, it was really the use cases for crypto and crime were maybe a bit more limited, I guess you could say. Maybe some money laundering here, maybe some people buying drugs on the internet on Silk Road, maybe some ransomware, maybe some just scams and Mount Gox type things, whatever. Fairly like elementary stuff, I guess you could say. And it seems like things have really advanced a lot since then. We have nation states involved, and criminal enterprises and whatnot. But how would you kind of map out this trajectory of how the use of criminal use of crypto has evolved over the last couple of years, and then how would you describe it like in 2024 today? Like what's the scale that we're talking about here?
It's an interesting story. I mean, criminals have always been early adopters of technology. And it's interesting to note the vast majority of crypto is for lawful and legitimate purposes, as we all know. And anyone that understands this economy and ecosystem realizes that the vast majority of money that's used in this economy is for lawful purposes. But as I like to say, you can't have trillions of dollars move into a new economy class and not attract criminals and grifters. So they follow the money like anyone else. And why do criminals want to use this new value transfer system? Well, they use it for the same reason that lawful purposes, people use it for lawful purposes. It's a high speed, low cost way to move money internationally in a fraction of a second at a very low cost. So they moved into this and they moved into it early and they recognized the opportunity to do it. I mean, heck, why do bad guys still rob banks, even though they know there are die packs, cameras, and they're and oftentimes going to get caught? Because that's where the money is. And so they recognized there was an opportunity for liquidity and an opportunity to steal on a scale not possible in traditional finance. So they moved in early and they started doing it. And as you say, in the early days, it facilitated that ability to move money on the dark market and facilitate drug transactions and some early stealing, right? But they have since expanded in really clever ways. Everything from rug pulls to investment scams. We now see child exploitation material traded there and a host of many, many others. And as you mentioned, we've seen nation state actors moving in. I mean, North Korea has a whole program dedicated to hacking and stealing to the tune of billions of dollars.
Yeah, that's pretty immense. It's pretty immense. Like the size is undeniable, right? And for the majority of crypto crime, like who would you say is the actors behind this? Are these, just kind of amateur guys in their parents' basement, or are these like large sophisticated criminal enterprises? Are these, you know, I mean, like who's this? What's the scale of the entities that are actually involved in this stuff? And maybe comparing 2013 to now. I would assume back 10 years ago, it had been more just, lone wolf type guys doing ransomware attacks or whatever. It seems like today there's a bit more sophistication happening, a bit more coordination and organization. And particularly in Brazil, you have a lot of this happening as well. So like, how would you describe like who are the main kind of problem actors here that are behind a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, so we have all of the above. However, as you say, back in the early days, there was a lot of independent actors, right? And in fact, you had to have some level of technical sophistication to get involved with some of these things. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. We see ransomware as a service, phishing as a service, and many of these other capabilities where nowadays we have organized, sophisticated groups who act as criminal enterprises. They sell these services. And so we see individuals who can farm out these capabilities where individuals will come on and act as associates and affiliates. They buy these services and then they go out there and conduct these attacks. Then they pay back the organizations that loan them and rent them the tools. I mean, you think about that as a organized criminal enterprises. We see organized criminal groups realizing they can make as much or more money farming out these capabilities. We see organized criminal and narcotics organizations getting involved in running these scam shops.
One area that I've always kind of been curious about, and is you have this on one end with crypto, you have the speed and the immediacy and the liquidity, and the immutable nature of it. On the other hand, you have the transparency element of it, right? You have or the pseudonymous nature, which can be is only anonymous up to a certain point, right? With tools like Chainalysis and things where you can easily kind of track down who's behind some of these transactions, especially if there's on and off ramps involved, right? And I recall, I think it was 2017. I think I was at a congressional hearing on crypto, and there was a guy from the FBI testifying, and he was saying like, "Look, we love when criminals use crypto because it makes it really easy to track like where the money came from, et cetera, et cetera." And I've always kind of had that image in my mind of like, if I'm a criminal, like the last thing I would want to use to move money around is crypto because it's the easiest way that they're going to be able to trace me, right? But that argument doesn't, I mean, that doesn't appear to be stopping people apparently, right? So, and then you have, there's been some critics of crypto, and crypto people have used that as like a defense, right, against this narrative that like, oh, crypto is all just scams and money laundering, whatever. And like no, like law enforcement likes this because it's easy to track. But critics of crypto have really kind of started pushing back on this, saying like, look, like this may be true, but it's not stopping people from engaging in this type of activity. So it's not really a question, but just would love your reaction to that.
Sure. Well, I think you have to keep in mind, as with anything, it's multiple factors. So it is true that there is transparency, and that is quite a deterrent when it comes to preventing crime. I mean, think of cameras, right? The deterrency that a camera can have, or logging of someone coming in and out of a door, for example,
Hmm.
with a physical infrastructure. But you have to look at multiple factors when it comes to that: speed, liquidity,
Hmm.
transparency, right? So many of those factors a criminal will weigh when they're looking at it. Availability, volume, right? So those all things go into that. And criminals will weigh all of those factors when they're trying to decide. A large pile of cash sitting on a table that's highly available, highly liquid, but underneath the glazing eye of a camera.
Yeah.
Do I grab it and run?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So criminals weigh multiple factors when they're deciding as to whether they commit a crime. And they're trying to decide, can I run fast enough? Yes, I may be on camera, but can I get away? So criminals go through all of that type of a logic, right? And many of them think, well, if I engage in enough obfuscation techniques, if I run fast enough, and perhaps they're counting on that the law enforcement agency or that the government or the part of the world that they engage that in, perhaps they won't be sophisticated enough to follow the
Mm.
breadcrumbs that I will leave behind. And maybe I'll be able to launder it fast enough or move it to a jurisdiction that won't be able to follow me.
Mm. So it's just a question of they realize that okay, I'm probably there's going to be breadcrumbs that folks can trace, but if I'm quick enough and if I'm opportunistic enough, I mean, and I'm doing this in maybe a jurisdiction that doesn't have the proper provisions and protections in place, or maybe they're not sophisticated enough to track me as quick as I'm moving. That as the criminal's doing the calculus in their brain and their mind, that can be a significant factor. It's like, hey, this there's more risk to this, but if I can just do it quickly, then my chances of getting away with it will be heightened, essentially.
And sometimes they just don't think,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's
Sometimes
it.
they just don't think. Sometimes part of the reason why they're doing that is because they don't make good decisions.
Shifting gears here, so your focus at Chainalysis is obviously on public sector partnerships, and would just love to get your kind of overview on like what is Chainalysis public sector strategy looking like right now, and maybe how does that compare to some of your approaches in the private sector?
Sure. So Chainalysis offers solutions to both public sector and private sector partners. Our business model provides solutions to help both sides of the business. So for private sector customers, we provide risk solutions to help our private sector customers assist with their compliance obligations, to help them make risk management solutions, to help them when conducting transactions to do that counterparty analysis to make sure that they are helping their customers do business to avoid doing business, let's say, with a sanctioned entity, or protect their customers when they're doing transactions. For our public sector customers, we're helping them support their investigations, to help them follow the money, and to conduct those kinds of things. So part of our strategy there is to ensure that we're providing the best data and tools to assist them with the speed of investigation, to help them recover victim funds. You
Mm.
know, as we were just talking about there, speed and transparency really assist in those kinds of investigations, because speed is the friend of both law enforcement as well as its enemy, because the longer it can take with an investigation, the more time these bad guys have to move that money and obfuscate the trail.
Mm.
So part of our strategy is how do we enable and empower law enforcement and the public sector to get to and find those answers as quick as possible.
And then maybe talk a bit about. I mean, we're obviously in Brazil right now. Talk a bit about like what are maybe the priorities of governments in this region? Like why are they what are the questions that they're asking you? What are they most interested in? Um, and maybe how does that how do their concerns maybe perhaps differ from what folks in North America and Washington D.C. might be asking about?
Well, you need only look at this country and the strength of this economy to answer many of those questions. You look at the strength of this economy and how fast this country is growing. Um, that helps to answer part of that question. This country recognizes how fast the business and economy is expanding, and they recognize that digital assets can and will play an important part in their future growth and how this country expands both on this continent in South America and how it will play in the global economy. And so they are looking at what are some of those smart regulatory and economic policies and solutions about how they incorporate digital assets into that. But to do that, they need to make sure they have good regulatory and compliance solutions to be able to provide those type of protections both to their economy and to their consumers. And so we hope to be able to provide those kind of solutions both to their law enforcement and to their regulatory agencies to protect their consumers.
And then how would you maybe compare and contrast, what you're seeing here to maybe what you're seeing in more, in like North America and Europe, or, more kind of like, I guess, Western countries?
I think there's probably more similarities than there really are differences because, money is money, and people are people. The same kinds of trends that we're seeing here are very similar to what we're seeing both in North America and Europe. I think you can look, each year we publish our crypto crime report. In fact, it just came out in early part of this year. Any of your listeners can go to chainalysis.com and download that report for free. We also produce our geography report, which compares global adoption of crypto. And you can look at how crypto is being adopted globally. And while there are some variations across the world as far as the speed at which crypto is being adopted, those trends are very similar, including how crypto is being adopted here in Brazil and in South America. And Brazil is leading South America for crypto adoption.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of that report. I have Kim Grauer, your research director, on my podcast. To every year I have her on to come and digest it all for us. But yeah, she's great. And then, so kind of focusing on this part of the world here a bit more. What are the main like questions and concerns that folks are having here? I mean, are people worried about? Are folks here in Brasilia worried about? Is it money laundering? I mean, Brazil's had a lot of, unfortunately, like just really bad pyramid investment schemes where the guy, takes $1 billion reais and he sends it off and it's gone, and everyone's left, just holding the bag basically. I mean, numerous occasions of that happening just in the past couple of years frankly, at scales that are like shocking.
Yes.
Like these aren't just like Nigerian prince, email scams. These are like the local government's involved and the local like businessmen are all involved. And like it's just like really big scale stuff, right? So there's obviously that. There's that investor protection component. There's the money laundering component, tax evasion. The Receita Federal, the tax authority here, has been doing a lot of work with. They've been putting a lot of thought into crypto, tax reporting and declaration provisions and things like that. But we'd just love to get like what are the folks you're talking to here like really concerned about? What are their big priorities right now?
So I would say money laundering certainly is a concern. Tax evasion, obviously, you can't have illicit activity being conducted and not have a concern about failure to pay and declare taxes. We also have to be concerned about money going to sanctioned entities. So sanctioned entities, by that I mean, for your listeners, when you have individuals who are sanctioned or individuals who are not to be receiving funds, you have to always be concerned that when financial institutions or others are making payments, that those payments are not going to individuals who are prohibited from receiving those funds. And so that means that financial institutions are doing appropriate screening, just like banks and financial institutions are supposed to do, to ensure that funds are not being transferred to prohibited individuals. And that needs to also apply to the crypto economy, that crypto funds are not being transferred to individuals who are sanctioned. And so we see that happening both here and around the world, where funds in the crypto economy sometimes get transferred to individuals who are sanctioned. And that oftentimes will be a larger category of illicit crypto transfers.
Yeah, and obviously that's becoming a bigger deal now with like Tornado Cash, and then there's another one recently that I'm forgetting the name of that just got. It's one of these coin join mixer type things. I think I can't remember the exact name of it. It's blanking on me, but yeah, that's obviously becoming a bigger deal now that there's a lot of folks that have interacted with these smart contracts in the past, or if they continue to, there's a lot of sanctions. And I think the thing that people sometimes fail to grasp those sanctions is that it's basically like, I forget the legal term for this, but there's not really like any kind of plausible deniability to it. You can't just like, oh, I didn't realize it was a sanctioned address. Like it's like, no, if you interact with that sanctioned address, like bam, you're guilty, right? Like you're like you're on the hook for that. So it's definitely something that needs to be paid attention to quite closely. And then one of the big, you were kind of alluding to this earlier, but one of the big developments here in Brazil is this development by the central bank of a kind of a hybrid central bank digital currency tokenization, platform, smart contract platform that, in theory, eventually, if they can get this to work properly, like, the financial system would end up kind of living on this Hyperledger Bazoo based, kind of smart contract platform, which is very grand ambition, but obviously there's going to be a lot of moving pieces to this, a lot of kind of privacy implications, there'll be a lot of like kind of data and analytics requirements related to this as well. And I was just thinking of like, how do you see, a blockchain analytics, what the role of a blockchain analytics firm like Chainalysis in these types of systems, as we see more of these CBDC systems being rolled out in different capacities around the world. I mean, we don't have anything really at scale yet to like measure against, but we can at least kind of entertain the question.
Well, I think clearly the power of blockchain analytics offers you a unique opportunity to provide sort of that financial underpinning and security to this type of a capability. Blockchain analytics can help with counterparty analysis in a way that other types have not offered us before. So I think as this market emerges, we'll see how that goes. I think particularly to this issue of sanctioned transfers, it can help prevent money from moving to parties that are prohibited and do that at scale and prevent that from happening. And I think that offers us the ability to prevent individuals who are sanctioned from receiving monies and do that, because once money's been transferred, it's very difficult to pull that back. Or and we see this unfortunately all the time, where an individual, or let's say a scam site that is a known scam site, but and yet an individual will be induced to send money there, an elderly individual, for example, or a known site, investment fraud site, and they'll send their money to it, only to then later find out that authorities had known that that was a known scam site. Now they're struggling to try to get their money back. But imagine if that scam site had been blacklisted, right? Well, that could have been machined and prevented in the first place. So imagine a future state where that kind of intelligence could have been shared ahead of time. That could have been machined out and prevented in the first place. So there are possibilities in the future where blockchain analytics could be assisting to prevent victims from being able to transfer those funds and stop it from happening before it ever would have happened in the first place. So there are possibilities where blockchain analytics could be protecting victims and stopping that from happening before it happens. And that would be a wonderful state if we could get there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I hadn't really put any thought into this, but this idea of it being almost like a preventative tool rather than just a tracking the money, tracking the bad guys, tracking where the funds went, but even using it more as like a preventative tool, like where, say if I'm a user, I'm interacting with, some suspect investment scheme site or something, I could almost have, maybe there's like a dashboard, or there's like a notification that pops up just saying like, hey, like this, according to Chainalysis, like this site is suspect.
Well, I mean,
like, be careful,
on your phone, right? I mean, if you get a suspicious email or a suspicious text, your phone will allow you to mark that to say, hey, I think this is junk mail, right? And your email provider will give you an alert saying, I think this is a junk mail or spam.
Yeah.
Right. Well, your financial institution it does that kind of proactive monitoring. So there are, and of course there needs to be some regulation and some real thought that goes into how that could be implemented. And I'm not necessarily prescribing how that should be done. I'm just saying the possibility is there that could be offered as a way to help protect future victims, to say that wallet that you're about to transfer to has a history of reported scam. Are you really sure you want to be sending to that? Right? To protect, it's always better to protect than to recover.
Yeah.
in this ecosystem.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot easier. Yeah, because once the recovery component is
So much harder.
is tricky. I mean, you guys have done some great work on helping to make with some big big name recoveries and things, but this is not easy to do, right?
No, it's very hard.
It's basically impossible unless there's and it's going to take a long time to fully recover your funds if ever, right? So I think the preventative aspect is really interesting. So I could definitely see that like gaining a lot of prominence. Once folks kind of figure out what the best way of doing this is. Well,
and every government will figure out what works best for them.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's there's kind of this question of like security versus liberty, right? Where it's like, okay, like if I want to transact this address, like who's the government to tell me I can't do that, right?
Exactly.
As long as it's not sanctioned or illegal or something. But there's having some kind of warning system just to say like, hey, like you may want to think twice about this. I just had another question about privacy coins. Switching gears here a little bit, and this is a bit of an interesting one because privacy coins have always kind of been like the boogeyman of crypto, right? Where it's like, oh, these criminals are transacting with Monero and we can't trace it and it's all secretive. And at this time in 2024, it seems like the liquidity in these things has been heavily decimated, right? They've been delisted from most exchanges. They're very difficult to get access to. You need to be a very sophisticated user to even with like something like Zcash, most transactions with Zcash aren't even shielded. I think it's like 99% like aren't even shielded, privately transacted. So I guess the question would be like, what is the state of privacy coins? Or like, are criminals actually using privacy coins for crypto crime in 2024? Is this a thing that exists anymore? Or did it ever exist? Or was it just kind of a boogeyman?
They have in the past, and they still do. But you bring up a very good point. It's the liquidity factor that makes it a challenge for them, right? So and they still do use it, and they still do request it at time. The challenge is liquidity, right? So if I'm a ransomware actor and I attack your company, and then I demand that you pay me in a privacy coin. The challenge is, and I want to ransom you for millions and millions of dollars equivalent. Mm-hmm. And I demand that you pay me in some obscure privacy coin. How in the world are you, as a company, going to go out there onto the open market and get millions of dollars equivalent in some obscure privacy coin and pay me? It's going to be pretty hard, right? Especially, as you said, many of these exchanges have delisted them. So your ability to get those are pretty hard. And in fact, in some places, it's going to be very difficult for you to do that. And I want to get paid, and I want to get paid quickly. So liquidity and speed are going to be my friend. And so you're right. Many of them, they want to be paid, and so they're asking for it to be paid in a very liquid form. And that's just not a privacy coin. However, some of them do, and still ask for payment in some of these privacy coins. So we do continue to see it, but you're right, it's sort of that balance for speed and privacy that we continue to see that natural tension among these actors. They have not entirely gone away, they still are in the ecosystem, but it's that natural tension.
And then, do you think has it been, the diminishing of the liquidity of these, I am assuming that this is...
And availability.
And availability of these, I'm assuming that this has been kind of a full, like, frontal assault from governments where these exchanges are licensed, essentially. It'd be like, hey, like, we'll let you guys continue to operate, but you got to delist, Zcash, Monero, whatever other coins. I'm assuming that, like, the pattern seems fairly clear. That's what's been going on. So it seems like it seems like a fairly clever approach on behalf of law enforcement, where it's like, we can't, like, just will these things out of existence, but if we just make it so it's so illiquid that it's basically unusable or it's very difficult to use, that's the easiest way to essentially just mitigate the use of these things, essentially. So and then that, I guess, what are the most popular coins that criminals use now? Is it Bitcoin? Is it Tether? Is it like other random things? Like, what are, like, do people really have a preference? Or is it just whatever's most liquid?
Well, recently we published a report, which I think your users might find interesting. So if they go to Chainalysis.com, they can look that up. A couple of years ago, Bitcoin really was king and really the most popular coin from a volume perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But just in the last 2 years, we've seen a shift to stable coins, where stable coins really have been the highest volume of coins traded. In fact, in the last 2 years, we've seen stable coins being the largest volume of coins being traded. And I think that's kind of an interesting shift. And in fact, you probably heard about the partnership that we had with Tether.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that, actually. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of an interesting shift that we've seen in the last 2 years, where stablecoins have really become the market dominant of coins going back and forth, where supplanting Bitcoin, and now it's stablecoins as the coin that most commonly traded.
So talk more about this Tether partnership, and like what exactly is the arrangement here, and how did this all come together?
Yeah, so Tether, obviously most popular, one of the most popular coins traded on the marketplace. Tether recognized the importance of having good continuous monitoring capabilities to be able to look at how that coin is traded, the capabilities that Chainalysis offers to be able to provide good, continuous, and both proactive monitoring of how that coin is being traded, and providing that kind of safety and security for their customers and for the consuming public. And we have a really strong partnership with them. They're a great company, and the capabilities that they offer. And so we formed a partnership with them, and they use our solutions and tools. And it's been a great partnership with them.
And Tether is interesting because it's one of the it's by far has like the highest adoption of any coin out there, but it's also for years been another one of these like boogeymen cryptos, right? Whether people saying that so it's not fully backed, or it's used for illicit purposes or whatever. Would love your thoughts on like just how much of a concern is Tether to governments at this in 2024, is for whether it be for like tax evasion or money laundering. Like is this I would assume this is probably one of the top questions you guys get when you go to a different go into a different city and meeting with local like law enforcement and government folks. I would assume this is probably one of the main questions you guys are getting on a regular basis.
Yeah, I don't know. I really wouldn't be able to say to that. What I do know is, as you said, because of its liquidity and its ease of use, it is used often, and it's probably one of the most commonly used coins and popular coins out there by people across the ecosystem. And because of that, that's part of the reason why the partnership with us and the transparency that our monitoring tools allow for it to be able to be monitored and be able to provide sort of that proactive capability. Now, as a result of that, they have the ability to see who is transacting with and do that kind of counterparty analysis, be able to ensure that the counterparties are not sanctioned individuals, and be able to provide sort of that assurance on the wallets that are doing business with each other.
Right.
Yeah, and that provides a much higher level of assurance on those transactions that previously didn't have.
Right. So I would assume that folks in if there's folks in law enforcement or tax authorities who are concerned about this, like this partnership comes as probably a breath of fresh air, or a bit of a relief. Like, okay, this is something that we need and something that we welcome. So, one other thing, maybe just kind of going back, like big picture, and over the last, I think in 2023 we had a lot of dust ups in the U.S. Kind of on the political, not to like get overly into politics here, but we saw a lot of kind of tarring and feathering of the crypto industry as just money laundering and illicit finance, and there's a big kind of Wall Street Journal article that was, I think, citing like some dubious research from Elizabeth Warren's staff about how crypto was funding Hamas, like post October 7th, and all this kind of stuff. And the crypto community did a pretty good job of pushing back against some of that stuff. And just given like you're obviously you've worked in DC for I guess well over 20 years now. You're still there quite frequently. How do you kind of see this narrative battle playing out? And and not without necessarily having to like take sides here, but like how do you see this narrative battle playing out? Is this is this still a question that you're getting on a regular basis, like in DC, where oh, this crypto stuff, it's only for scams and illicit finance, right? Or have we been able to kind of change the narrative around some of these things?
Yeah, I don't hear that quite as much as we used to, right? I think there's always a little bit of that, and I think that will persist for a time. I think much of that comes from really a lack of awareness. I think the best antidote for that is education and awareness. As with anything, education and awareness is one of the best ways to address any one of these kinds of questions. And that's really what Chainalysis spends a lot of our time on. In fact, that's kind of what I spend most of my time on. You know, when Jonathan made the pitch to invite me to join Chainalysis, he gave me really three missions. He said, Gurvais, first and foremost, I want you to interface with law enforcement executives around the world and talk to them about their requirements and what they're trying to accomplish. Two, I want you meeting with our partners in the industry and working with them. And three, I want you engaging in thought leadership to help educate the community on how crypto can address national security priorities. And so I spend a lot of my time on thought leadership, and that's this education piece. And I think spending time on that and bringing awareness about what crypto is and what it isn't, and sort of help doing a little bit of that myth busting, I think is important. And that's really where we're talking about here. And the best way to do that is bring forward that data. What is the data telling us about this issue and this story? And the data tells us here how crypto is being used. Crypto, yes, is used both by criminals and terrorists alike, but the data does show us that it's not used at the level some people say and not in the ways that some people believe.
Yeah.
But it's important to monitor that, right? Because the ecosystem does change.
Yeah.
Criminals and terrorists are enterprising, and so the way they used it last year may not be the way they use it next year, and so we've got to maintain vigilance. And by the way, any use of crypto by a terrorist or a criminal is too much, so we have to stay vigilant and stay on top of it.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe looking at, if you're doing kind of like a threat analysis here of the next maybe five years, looking 5 years into the future here, 2030. I mean, how do you see? I'm struggling with the best way to phrase this question, maybe, but like, how do you see just like the crypto like threat landscape maybe evolving? Like, do you think that we can get to a point where blockchain analysis tools and solutions and adoption of these solutions can get to the point where, like, if you're a criminal and you're trying to do something with crypto, it's like you're gonna have a bad time. Like, it's just best to just stay away from this stuff. Or, I mean, are they going to be enterprising enough to stay, 2-3 steps ahead of you guys? And are there perhaps like other, use cases on the horizon that maybe like we're just starting to see now that we maybe haven't? It's like, oh, we should probably be paying attention to this.
Yeah. So here's kind of what I see happening. We are seeing global adoption of blockchain analytics across law enforcement and regulatory agencies, both here in South America and in Europe and Asia, on a scale that's accelerating. What I think the positive benefit for the consuming public and the economies are going to be significant. That's going to provide large-scale consumer protection that we haven't seen in years past. That's going to spell bad news for bad guys, because that's going to begin to protect us at the transactional level at a higher speed. That will make it more difficult for bad guys to steal money and to do it at the scale they have before. However, that's then going to incentivize them to up their game and look for new and clever ways. So then that cat and mouse game is going to then get accelerated. That means law enforcement and public sector is going to have to innovate. It also means private sector, those of us who build the tools and gather the data, are going to have to also innovate. I was telling a group recently, we have got to build tools and capabilities that allow law enforcement to do the work of 100 or 1,000, because the bad guys are out there working, and there's never going to be enough resources for the police officer. We're never going to be able to hire 100 more police officers in some of these agencies. So that means we've got to build a tool that lets one police officer do the work of 100 or 1,000. So that means we've got to build smarter tools to empower them to do more. So that's a challenge for us, to build smarter tools to let them be able to do more. So it's this continual sort of cat and mouse. But I do think we can make really leapfrog capabilities to make the ecosystem better. That's one. Number two, crypto is just the beginning. Right now, we're dealing with trillions of dollars in cryptocurrency, meaning the digitization or the tokenization of value in the form of crypto. But this is just the beginning of tokenization. We have lots of other things that are going to be tokenized. We have hundreds of trillions of dollars in real property that have not yet been tokenized. Your homes, your vehicles, your other things that will eventually become tokenized, then those are going to come onto the open market and be traded.
Yeah.
What's going to happen when those trillions of dollars come onto the marketplace and get traded, right? Well, that's going to change many things about our economy and facilitate a frictionless or less friction in how value is transferred. That's also going to incentivize criminals to move into that marketplace because they're going to want a subfraction of those trillions. Again, then government's going to have to up its game to figure out, how do I address mortgage fraud when it's a tokenized building worth $100 million that's just been fractionalized, tokenized, and a portion of that's been stolen. So again, we're going to have to continue to up our game. And what are the regulatory and legal implications when a portion of that's been stolen? So it's this sort of continual evolution. It's exciting, but it's also a little intimidating. So that means government and private industry are going to have to continue to evolve and continue to grow with that. And we're going to have to educate the public on how to grow through these changes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought experiment because if you think about, kind of moving beyond, to the, real world assets as the buzzword is right now, right?
And it will happen.
Yeah, it will happen. It will happen. And, say if I have, the ownership of my car, the title of my car is an NFT that I have in my wallet. And if, somebody hacks into my wallet and steals my car title NFT, and, I still have the car, but I don't have the title for it, then then what happens, right? And how do I go about getting my, these are interesting kind of thought experiments, right? There's probably a better way to do it than that, to arrange these types of things. But
and we hope that because of the cryptographic security that some of those things offer, that hopefully it will offer a level of protection that we previously haven't had. Right? With traditional database protections, when someone hacks into a database, and they're able to steal and download all of that. Whereas in a cryptographic solution where the data is distributed over multiple nodes and it's cryptographically protected, we hope that through some of those future solutions, it will be much harder for individuals to steal that data, and that I will have digital ownership rights to own and protect and hold my data.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think that's, coming up with these systems that allow for that tokenization of these assets, but then also protect the holders of these things. So it's not, it's like, oh, I clicked on a wrong link and then now I lost the title to my house because somebody hacked into my computer and stole it, right? So coming up with systems that can basically provide the level of protection that are going to be necessary in this type of environment, and also educating people about these things too, right? Because still, once you get out into the real world, people still are, even in 2024, crypto and blockchain is still this kind of nebulous thing that most people don't really understand, right? So the pace of technological innovation and by proxy, the pace by which criminals and criminal enterprises are innovating and finding new schemes is only increasing. But our brains only have so much capacity to adapt to technological change, right?
And we'll need to grow at the pace people can absorb that.
Yeah.
And grow where the capabilities and the protections and the legal protections and the privacy protections are there. And we don't want to grow too fast where those protections are not there, because that's important and necessary.
Yeah, that just opens up a whole new attack surface, I think, if we evolve faster than or if we implement these things faster than people can realistically adjust to them and take them into account. Well, Gurvais, I really appreciate your time today. Super interesting conversation. Really enjoyed just hearing about from your vantage point here and your experiences. Any final thoughts from you on, and then also, what's the best way for folks to find you or learn more if they're interested in connecting or learning more about Chainalysis?
Sure. So they can go to chainalysis.com. We also have a Chainalysis Academy. So you can go to academy.chainalysis.com. We have a lot of free resources that individuals can go to learn more about this space. I would encourage your listeners to go there if they can learn more about this new and emerging economy. It's coming to all of us. I'm also on LinkedIn if individuals want to learn a little bit more about it. This is an exciting space. And I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today and look forward to coming back again. You know, Brazil is a wonderful place. So many people don't realize just how marvelous Brazil is. I mean, with the size of this economy and how it is changing the world's economic face, it's just marvelous. It's why I come down here so often, and it's why I'll be back.
Nice. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more as a transplant here, a gringo transplant. Couldn't agree with you more. So, well, Gurvais, really appreciate your time today. And thanks everyone for watching and listening today. And we'll see you next time.